up and running then. Okay, so let's see what we got here. Now, we finished up we did kind of the background overview of Daniel and the 70 weeks prophecy that's laid out for us in Daniel chapter 9. And we really talked about last week Jeremiah chapter 25 and Jeremiah chapter 29, which were books that Daniel, who was this young Jewish kid who was taken captive by the Babylonian Empire during the incursion into the land of Israel. And he was reading Jeremiah chapter 25 and 29 and realized that the Lord had decided to punish Israel for how long?
70 years.
For 70 years. What was the penalty for, primarily?
It's because they didn't respect the law that they're supposed to let the ground rest during one period, 1 year, each cycle of 7 years.
Oh.
They should walk the ground during 6 years, and the 7th year the ground should stay resting.
Very good.
And they do that during 10 consecutive cycles. That the penalty were each year multiplied by.
Okay, so in other words, you're saying, so every 7 years they were supposed to rest the land how much?
1 year.
Okay, and so apparently they violated that, what was called what? The Sabbath for the land. In fact, the portion that Phil's talking about is Leviticus chapter 25, verses 3 and 4 is where you'll find that. Steve, you can flip to that and read it real quick. But Phil, so you're saying this didn't just happen one time.
No.
This happened again and again and again.
Again and again. While they knew that it was a rule and they didn't respect it. So God decided to put them in punishment and take them out of the land of Israel in order for the land to rest during 70 years, which was the period of years cumulative of disrespect.
Aha. So what's the total number of years that they were doing this Sabbath violation? Who can figure it out?
490.
There you go, 490. How do you get to 490, Phil?
Because one cycle, it's 7 years.
Uh-huh.
Okay? And they'll get punished 70 years, which is 10 times 7 years, 7 cycle.
Okay, but
So 7 cycle per 7 times make us 7 cycle.
not times 10 though. Not times 10. But you got the number right, 490. But it's 7 years times
70,
70.
which is 490.
So you know that they were doing it. Israel was violating the land Sabbath for 490 years, just a decade short of 500 years. How do we know? Because God penalized them for 70 years in the Babylonian captivity, which means that if you took, sit down and do math, you took the 70 years and you multiplied it by the 7-year cycle, which is what a week of years is, a week. Just think of it, you could put down literally a unit of 7. So if you have a week of days, you have a regular, everyday week. Saturday, Sunday you have off, Monday through Friday you work. Most people have a 5-day work week with a 2-day weekend, so you have a 7-day week. What Israel had was a 7-year week of years, and the land was supposed to be rested for the Sabbath year. Just like man was supposed to rest on the Sabbath day, the land was supposed to rest on the Sabbath year. So read Leviticus 25 for us, real quick, 3 and 4.
6 years thou shalt sow thy field, and 6 years thou shalt prune thy vineyard, and gather in the fruit thereof. But in the 7th year shall be the Sabbath of rest unto the land, a Sabbath for the Lord. Thou shalt neither sow thy field, nor prune thy vineyard.
And Ingrid, hit Chronicles,
Yeah, I
2nd
got it.
Chronicles,
20.
run that real quick.
And them that had escaped from
Or
this...
just for the people out there.
sorry,
It's 2nd Chronicles,
Chronicles
chapter 36.
verses 20 and 21.
Okay.
And them that had escaped from the sword carried he away to Babylon, where there were servants to him and his sons until the reign of the kingdom of Persia, to fulfill the word of the Lord by the mouth of Jeremiah, until the land had enjoyed her Sabbaths. For as long as she lay desolate, she kept Sabbath, to fulfill 70 years.
70 years is how many?
70.
That's 70,
years.
right? Because Abraham Lincoln, Gettysburg, 4 score. The score is 20 years. So we've got 3 scores. That's 20, 20, 20 is 60 plus what?
10 years.
10. That gives us 70. So that's where you get the 70 years Babylonian captivity. So we have basically Daniel is reading Jeremiah and finding out, wait a minute, there was only going to 7 years captivity. We've been, I'm 80 years old. I came here when I was 14. That means the captivity is almost over. It's almost time to go home. And so there was excitement in his prayer. And let's see. Did we do Leviticus 25, 3 and 4? You did that already, Phil? Or Steve? Okay, so let's do this. We ran quickly through. That was our introduction to Daniel. So Daniel is praying now. He's an older guy. The Daniel in Daniel chapter 2, who has the interpretation of the metallic man dream for King Nebuchadnezzar, he's grown up and grown old, and he's become a leader in the land of Babylon. He's been an advisor to King Nebuchadnezzar, and now Nebuchadnezzar has stepped down from the throne and been, superseded by, the Persian Empire. And Daniel realizes that he's about to go home, and the Babylonian Empire, which Daniel interpreted for King Nebuchadnezzar back in Daniel chapter 2, the metallic man, which was the head of gold, breast of silver, hips of brass, legs of iron, and 2 feet of iron and clay. The head of gold was what empire?
Babylonian.
Okay. And then the chest of silver,
Media.
which is a valuable metal, but not quite as valuable as gold. Which one was that?
Medio-Persian.
Medo-Persian. And then we have the hips of brass.
Greek.
That's the Greek Empire, Alexander the Great. Remember when he died, he divided, give it to the strong. It's 4 generals.
Yeah.
Bonus points if anybody can tell me.
Cassander, Alexander, Cassander, Lysimachus,
Lysimachus,
Ptolemy, and Seleucus.
Seleucus, which is important, and that's key. Seleucus was the most important because he's a forerunner or a foreshadower of the Antichrist. One of his descendants, General Seleucus, had a great-great-grandson who was named, Antiochus Epiphanes, who they call Epimanes the Madman. He's the guy who slaughtered a pig on the altar in the rebuilt temple, which hasn't been rebuilt as of Daniel chapter 9 yet, but it's about to be. So Daniel was young when he gave that prophecy that we find laid out for us in Daniel chapter 2, which we won't have time to look at today. But he's an older man by the time he's an elderly man by the time we got to Daniel chapter 9. And now we're going to pick up. We hit this last week, but just to give it context, we'll push through. Because the important thing about what we're doing here, and for those of you that are in home, we are studying the Word of God with a view towards being able to teach it to others. So we're going to review this stuff just like this with physics, or geometry, where we're laying the foundation, and then we're going to move on to the next step. But let's go back and review. I always appreciated that, but like algebra and math, which I sucked at. I always appreciate when a professor would go back and, okay, let's review last week. Remember we learned that such and such and so. Remember how we learned that? Oh, yeah, that's right. Because it can help refresh our memory. So now, for those of our friends out in the internet land, what they're doing, they're learning too. Not just to get bonus points, like the Jehovah's Witnesses, to say I clocked in 2 hours of Bible study and I passed out 2 Watchtower, magazines. Maybe I'll get into the kingdom of heaven. No. The goal for those of us that are already born again, which all of us that are here today is to learn the Bible well enough to be able to teach it to other people, to explain it to other people. And so that should be everybody's goal. And the 70 weeks prophecy is the most amazing, and in my opinion, Dave Hunt and Chuck Missler and some other people as well, it's the most inspiring and motivating prophecy in the Bible because it gives you the big picture of the whole scheme of human history, all of the world kingdoms, and the end of all things. What is the purpose to our life? Getting up and going to work every day, getting married, having a couple kids, and then retiring? No. The purpose is to work and toil and serve the Lord with your life. And store up for yourself treasures in heaven. And then, when your life is over, you can inherit that reward. But that reward cannot be fully inherited until the end of the 70th week. So, Phil's going to give us Daniel chapter 9 and 2. Chapter 9, verses 1 and 2 as sort of a summary review. So Daniel, older guy, he's on his knees praying. He's just read Jeremiah. He's excited, man. He's like, oh, man, 70 years, we're almost done. That means we're about to be allowed by God, not by the king, not by Nebuchadnezzar. Nebuchadnezzar's already off the throne now, and he and Daniel became friends. But now there's a new Medo-Persian king on the throne, Artaxerxes, Longimanus. And it's not the kings that are deciding who does what. It's God who is dictating the things that are going to affect his nation, Israel. And he's using these pagan kings to administer his will. So he refers to, God does, Nebuchadnezzar as my servant Nebuchadnezzar, because he's going to punish you because you guys violated for 490 years the 70, one out of every 7 years Sabbath rest for the land. And so you owe me 70, which is going to have to play itself out over 490 years, right? Right? So they got to pay the full 70-year penalty. You can't just sort of, you violated a couple, so no, they got to pay the whole 70 back. But thankfully, they didn't have to pay the whole 490 back, right?
Yeah.
They only had to pay 1/7.
Did him a huge favor there.
Right? So Daniel is now finding out it's about time to go home. So we pick it up, Daniel chapter 9, verses 1 and 2.
In the first year of Darius, the son of Ahasuerus, of the seed of the Medes, which was made king over the realm of the Chaldeans, in the first year of his reign, I, Daniel, understood by books the number of the years, whereof the word of the Lord came to Jeremiah the prophet, that he would accomplish 70 years in the desolations of Jerusalem.
There you go. So if a Bible study teacher, man, the guy gets up there and he says crazy things, and I say outrageous and crazy things. But fortunately, we have the guidebook, basic instructions before leaving Earth. Somebody referred to it as an acronym. But we have it all right there. So we know for a fact, this isn't just my opinion. We find out from Daniel chapter 9, verses 1 and 2, the Babylonian Empire has ended now. The Medo-Persian Empire has begun, and King Nebuchadnezzar has been replaced by Darius the Mede, who is the son of Ahasuerus. Very hard name to pronounce. He's of the Median line of kings that united together with the Persian line of kings, and Darius himself would soon be superseded by Artaxerxes. And so in verse 2 it says, Daniel understood by books. What books? Jeremiah. How do you know? It says so in the next line. It says the book of Jeremiah the prophet that, God would accomplish 70 years in the desolation. So he knew it was time to get ready to go home. And so now we jump down a little bit in Daniel chapter 9, and we find out that Daniel's all excited and praying over that. So Steve, give us verses 20 through 24. Very key. A lot of stuff in those 4 verses, 21, 2, 3, and 4. Give that to us, and then we'll stop right there.
And while I was speaking and praying, confessing my sin and the sin of my people Israel, and presenting my supplication before the Lord my God, for the holy mountain of my God, yea, while I was speaking in prayer, even the man Gabriel, whom I had seen in a vision at the beginning, being caused to fly swiftly, touched me about the time of the evening oblation. And he informed me and talked with me and said, O Daniel, I am come forth to give thee skill and understanding. At the beginning of thy supplication, the commandment came forth, and I am come to show thee, for thou art greatly beloved. Therefore, understand the matter and consider the vision.
Stop right there before you get to 24. Okay, so Daniel saying, while I was praying, the man Gabriel. Now, Gabriel's not a man in that he's a son of Adam. He appears, he's an angel. B'nai Elohim, sons of God, appears in the form of a man. And he speaks to Daniel and tells Daniel that, I'm come forth to give you skill and understanding. I'm about to explain to you how things work in heaven because you're highly favored of God. And so he says, now consider the vision. So now we find out that Daniel is about to receive verse 24 directly from the mouth of Gabriel. And this is quite an important verse. Maybe one of the most important verses in all of the Bible because there's a lot of meat packed in there. And he relates to him, Gabriel does, Daniel chapter 9, verse 24. And it says what, Steve?
70 weeks are determined upon thy people and upon thy holy city, to finish the transgression and to make an end of sins, and to make reconciliation for iniquity, and to bring in everlasting righteousness, and to seal up the vision and prophecy, and to anoint the most holy.
Okay, so now in verse 24, there's a reference to 70 weeks. But this isn't the same 70 weeks that they had just served in Babylonian captivity. No, God was using that as a set piece, as a template or a type, so he could teach Daniel, so Daniel could teach the people, and then through the prophets, we could teach one another in the church about how God sees things and how he has a mathematical precision. And so the same way that Israel served, 70 years in captivity because they had violated their their week of years for the land. Again, we said that a week is what? Another way of saying week is a unit of 7.
Mm-hmm.
So you could have, if you have a week of days, how many days do you have?
7.
If you have a week of years, how many years would you have?
49.
No, you'd have 7, right?
Oh.
You see why? Because remember, the way Israel, an agrarian country, is thinking, they think in terms of weeks of days and weeks of years. So if I ask you how many, I won't be able to be back here to teach again until next week. How many days will it be until I come back to teach again?
7 days.
How many? 7?
7 days.
Yep. Okay, now if I said, man, it's going to be a week of years before, because I got to go to, preach to the Aborigines in the Outback, and it's going to take a while, so it'll be a week of years, and I'll be back to finish up the book of Daniel. How long would that be?
7 years.
7 years. Because it's not a week of days, it's a week of years. So, Gabriel is telling Daniel, 70 weeks are determined upon thy people. He can't be talking about literal 24-hour day weeks, right? Because then that would mean 70 days later that all the things that Daniel said would happen, or Gabriel told Daniel would happen, would have already happened.
I remember before you taught us that the weeks was translated into Shabum.
That's another, and in Hebrew, Shabua,
Shabua? Is that how it is?
Shabua is a way to pronounce it.
What did that mean? Was it?
It's just another way of saying unit or set, 70 Shabuim are appointed. Weeks. That's
Okay.
just the Hebrew word for weeks. There's no
Okay.
magical, special
Something else?
meaning. Like, the Hebrew was important for me to lay it out, though we pointed out before. Now you know a little bit of biblical Hebrew. It just means, it's just sort of the Hebrew for week,
Okay.
meaning we now know a unit of 7. It could be a week of days. That's how it's normally used when you use the word week. We normally think in terms of work week, so we usually use the term week. Hey, Steve, can you come back next week? That means I'm asking him to come back 7 days from now. But Israel, because they were a farmland country, an agrarian country, they also thought in terms of weeks of years, because in Leviticus, they knew the farmers were supposed to grow the land for 6 years, and then the 7th year, you were supposed to not grow the land at all, and you were trusting the Lord in the 6th year of that growth, that the Lord would give you a double harvest. He would magically cause the crops to grow twice as much. Why? Because he wanted you to obey the Sabbath, not the Sabbath day, but the Sabbath year, meaning you would have this rich, fertile farmland, and you wouldn't grow anything for a whole 12 months, for a whole year. And that took a little bit of faith, and I think that was part of what offended God so much. Was one, he built the, somebody said something like, oh, your God builds man out of the dirt. I'll build a man out of the dirt. And the guy said, you make your own dirt.
Yeah, yes, sir.
Right? And God made the dirt. And so he knows that it only has enough nutrients to grow the crops every 6 years. And then it needs, just like the human body needs a day's rest after a week of work, 6 days hard work, needs a day's rest to be able to continue to function. God knows the land is the same way, because it's made up of atoms and molecules as well. So when Israel violated that, it was based upon two reasons. One, greed. Hey, I can grow twice as much. My other friends aren't growing any crops. I'll continue growing, and I'll be able to sell, and I'll be able to sell and make a profit and get myself, Cadillac, SUV or a Lexus, or get the new Lamborghini or whatever, and park it next to my Camel and all that. So it was greed, and then it was also a lack of faith, right? And we learned in the New Testament, without faith, Paul says, it is impossible to do what?
Please God.
It's impossible to please God. He's not interested in burning incense or killing lambs or goats. He's interested in you having faith and trust in him. And so, when they violated the land, they parted it. They want to make a little extra profit. But a lot of it too was the fact that Israel didn't believe that God could come through on his promise to make the crops. So, man, we only got 12 months worth of food out of last year's crop harvest. I know that, the last 7 years, I remember, we did get that bumper crop, and we got 24 months out of it, but maybe God was lucky, I don't know. And so they would do things like continue to grow the land because, I don't think enough, what we harvest and put in the storehouse, I don't know if the Lord is going to make that provision last. That's what he did with the Festival of Lights, Hanukkah. Remember, there was only enough oil for the lamp to burn for one day, and after Antiochus Epiphanes, the guy who was the great-great-grandson of Seleucus, the general who worked under Alexander the Great, who received the portion of the Greek Empire that contained Judea, when he desecrated the rebuilt temple, which the Persian Empire was about to give Israel permission to go rebuild, when he did that, they had to ritualistically cleanse the temple by burning incense and oil in the Holy of Holies for 7 days, 8 days, 8 days. We got the 8. That's where we get the candelabra from. You would light one candle for each day, and there was only enough oil, and you had to use a special ritualistic oil to put in the menorah, which is a special type of candelabra that you would use during the temple cleansing ceremony. And so it should have only lasted for 1 day, but God supernaturally made that special holy oil last 8 days, which is why Israel to this day, and Jewish people who don't live in Israel to this day, celebrate a holiday around what we would call Christmas time in December of the year called Hanukkah, or the Festival of Lights. And the Festival of Lights is because God supernaturally made the oil last for 8 days. It should have burnt out after 1 day, so that the temple could be ritualistically cleansed and Israel could begin to reconcile himself with the blood of lambs and goats, with the blood sacrifice system that was still in place at that time. So anyway, I digress. So the 70 weeks that Daniel is being spoken of by Gabriel is speaking to Daniel about, it's not 70 weeks of days, but 70 weeks of years. And we know it's not weeks of days because Daniel's being told during this 70-week period, this is going to happen. All transgression will be finished. It will be to make an end of sins and make reconciliation for iniquity and to bring in everlasting righteousness and to seal the vision and prophecy and to anoint the most holy. That's in that context is anointing of the Holy Temple, and I think, a double entendre could also make reference to the anointing of the Messiah who hasn't yet come. So Gabriel is saying to Daniel that at the end of this 70 weeks of years, all sin will end. It couldn't have been 70 contiguous years either, because we find out that this decree is made. We're going to find out a little bit later that Artaxerxes Longimanus gave permission to rebuild the temple on Nisan 10 in the year 445 BC. If you counted 70 consecutive years out from 445 BC, that would put you at 4 what? 35, 25, 15, 05, 05 AD, 15 AD, 25 AD. So you would have had the kingdom of heaven established on earth 7 years before Jesus got crucified. Impossible. That couldn't have happened. So the Bible must be wrong. There must be something wrong with the math here. The 70 weeks of years is a total of what? 70 times 7 will give us
490.
490 years. And now let's go to our chart now. Okay, here's our trusty, dusty Bible 70 years chart here. And we've got the 70 weeks of years on the big board here with a little more detail. But this is the simplified version for those who are mathematically challenged like me. Okay, so we find out that very shortly that Artaxerxes Longimanus is going to give a decree, which is on 445 BC, March 14th, which is Nisan 10 on the Jewish calendar, and that 70 years from that would have been, that would put us at 25 AD. So we know when we look at our timeline chart of 6,000 years of human history plus the millennium, we have the Babylonian captivity here, and we find out that 70 years from there will put us right about here, just before Jesus is crucified. But the problem is, in 25 AD, everlasting righteousness did not begin.
Mm-hmm.
All sin didn't end in 25 AD, right? 7 years later, Jesus is crucified. So what we find here, and Bible scholars were able to determine, is that, wait a minute, there is an implied parenthetical break. What Gabriel is saying, that there's going to be a total of 70 prophetic weeks, not of years. In other words, these prophetic years would be a total of 490 solar, years, lunar years, because the Jewish calendar was based on lunar. So you had 490 years, but they would not run consecutively to one another. So they wouldn't run, all right, in other words, 490 years, so 70 weeks of years gives us 490 years. So that's 500 years minus 1 decade from 445 BC. Again, that would put us where? That would put us in the early ADs. And again, Jesus hadn't brought in everlasting righteousness. In fact, he got crucified and the world got more and more evil after he rose from the dead. So, either the Bible's wrong, or there is an implied parenthetical dividing out the 70 weeks into more than one section. And we're going to find out what that section is. In fact, we're going to find out in the very next verse that Ingrid's going to read to us that the 70 weeks of years, or the 490 total years that are given to Daniel for the nation Israel until the Messiah comes and all sin comes to an end and the kingdom of heaven is established on earth, because that's what Daniel chapter 9 verse 24 is saying. It's saying basically after 70 weeks of years, or after 490 prophetic years, the kingdom of heaven will be established on earth and there'll be no more sin ever again. That didn't happen 500 years after, Gabriel spoke these words. So the Bible's either wrong, or there is a subdivision in that 70 weeks of years. Well, we look right to the next verse, Daniel chapter 9, verse 25, and we find out that that's exactly what we have. We have the 70 weeks of years, or the 490 years, divided out into two distinct portions. The first being 69 weeks of years, which is a total of how many years?
483 years.
That's right. And if you have 483 years in the first phase of the 70 weeks, how many years would you have left for the second phase? You'd only have 7 years left because you got a total of 490 prophetic years, right? 483 are the first 69 weeks of years. So if you can subtract 483 from 490, that gives you 4, 5, 6, 7, gives you 7 years left. That 7 years left is the last of the 70 weeks of Daniel made reference to it in Daniel chapter 9, verse 24. That's why I and other Bible scholars refer to this final 7 years left after the 69 weeks of years is over as the what?
70th.
The 70th year. Because you got the first 60. Part A, or phase 1 of the 70 weeks of years, is the first 69 weeks of years, 483 prophetic years. They happen to run consecutively. And then you have the final 7-year period of time, or the final week of years, known as the final or 70th, because what comes after 69 is 70. Right, so you already have the first 69 weeks of years transpiring in Daniel chapter 9, verse 24, and then you have Daniel chapter 9, verse 24 through Daniel chapter 9, verse 26, and then you finally get to the 70th, or the last 7-year period of this 490-year prophetic time in verse 27 of Daniel chapter 9. So, okay, Daniel chapter 9, verse 25. Read that to us, and let's see whether or not I'm right about there being a subdivision of the 70 weeks of Daniel into phase A, which is the first 69 weeks of years, and phase B, which is the final 70th week of years.
Okay. Know therefore and understand that from the going forth of the commandment to restore and to build Jerusalem unto the Messiah, to the Prince shall be.
Wait, read that again.
Know therefore and understand that from the going forth of the commandment to restore and build Jerusalem unto the Messiah, the Prince shall be 7 weeks.
No, I'm only because everybody that's listening, what we want to do, we want to put the inflections where they go so that we know, because it's very confusing. We don't know whether this prince is that prince, but in this case, the Hebrew phrase is Moshiach Nagi, which means Messiah the Prince.
Okay.
So Messiah the Prince is the title of the Messiah, or the Moshiach Nagi in Hebrew. So read that together, and then, because then there's another prince, but we don't want to get confused with that guy, because there's another prince who's not the Messiah the Prince, but he's a prince, and he's going to pretend to be Messiah the Prince, but he's going to be the exact opposite. So let's go ahead and read that again for us.
Okay. Know therefore and understand that from the going forth of the commandment to restore and build Jerusalem unto the Messiah the Prince shall be 7 weeks and 62 weeks. The street shall be built again, and the wall even in troublous times.
Now I remember the first time I started studying 70 weeks of Daniel, verse 25 threw me for a loop, because I was like, wait a minute. Now Dave Hunt said that there was 69 weeks and then there was a 70th week. This is, this is 67 weeks, and it was confusing to me. And because then a little bit later it says after the 2 weeks, what this is an algebraic formula being laid out in verse 25. So he's saying 7 weeks and add to 7 weeks.
60.
And
2.
So you got 7 plus 60 plus 2.
69.
Gives you 69. So 60. So if you look at 3 score in 2 weeks, that's 62, and add 7, that gives you 69. If you look at 7 and then 3 score being 60, and then you add 2, that still gives you 69. And these are not 69 days. These are not 69 weeks. These are 69 weeks of years. This is where Phil got the 483 years, of the 490 total years that are laid out for us in Daniel chapter 9, verse 24. Okay, now this is where it gets interesting, because historically speaking, we were able to find out, and we've got historical proof of this in a really good book, and I think I brought it when we did this at Resurrection Sunday, the Thursday prior to that. We did a special teaching on the resurrection, how it had to be on a certain day and all that. And I brought the book called, anybody remember the
Sir
book?
Anderson.
Sir Robert
Sir
Anderson.
Robert Anderson.
That's right. The name of the book was.
The Coming Prince.
It's you were talking about just what you were saying here, the coming prince. But the coming prince isn't Mashiach Nagid,
No.
not Messiah the prince, but a different prince is coming. And Sir Robert Anderson, who was a mathematician and a born-again Christian, and was the head of Scotland Yard, which was like the world's foremost investigative agency in England at the time, he sat down and did the mathematical computations dated from the historical and archaeologically proven date of Nisan 10, 445 BC, when the king of the Medo-Persian Empire that succeeded to Darius, who was sitting on the throne at the time Daniel chapter 9 verse 1 was written. Darius was the king, but he would soon be succeeded by another Medo-Persian king, Artaxerxes. And Artaxerxes is the one who gave a commandment, made a law saying that the children of Israel, the Hebrews, that had been in Babylonian captivity since, forever, since the 500s, that they got, taken captive some 70 years earlier, and, in the 500s BC, they were taken captive. He's the one that passed the law that says that not only can they go back, but they can go back and rebuild the walls of Jerusalem. And the reason why that's significant is because building of a wall is kind of considered sort of a military act of war type thing. Sometimes when an invading nation takes over, just like at the end of World War II, they'll say, okay, Germany, you can't have an army anymore because you're a warmonger. Okay, Japan, you can't have an army either because you had all of those guys in your Air Force flying to our planes commit harakiri, which is Japanese for suicide, right? Remember those guys? Remember the kamikaze pilots would commit suicide on harakiri by flying their planes directly into the American aircraft carriers. And that was a new thing, man. That had not been seen in modern day warfare before. So they were stripped of their right to have a military. And so the walls or the battlements built around the city were really, back in those days, it was a way of establishing your military and political independence from whatever the controlling governing nation would be. So that was a big deal that, Jerusalem was allowed to rebuild itself. The temple was allowed to be rebuilt as well. And Nehemiah, I think, is the guy that went, was sad, and he went to, the king said, "Oh, Nehemiah, look, because there were a bunch of these faithful Jewish prophets were living in Babylon now, Medo-Persia, and Nehemiah was the one who went, and the king said, "You've been such a faithful servant to me, what's wrong? You look sad. Tell me, whatever you ask for, I'll give it to you. You want some dancing girls in your old age to while away the time until you wait till you get gathered to your father?" He said, "No, I'm not looking for any dancing girls, but geez, if you really want to give me like a present to make me put a smile on my old face, let us go back and rebuild the temple to our God." And Nehemiah was given permission. Granted, you're allowed to go back and rebuild the temple in Jerusalem. So Nehemiah is the guy that got that taken care of. So God moved the heart of the Medo-Persian emperor at the time to allow that. And Artaxerxes Longimanus, the guy who gave the permission to restore and rebuild the walls, which is a military move. And that, we find out historically, occurred on Nisan 10, 445 BC. And that's important because when you count forward from that date, 483 years, Sir Robert Anderson, who I mentioned was a mathematician, he was able to go back and use all of Canada's, the Royal Naval Observatory in London, which is where they determine Greenwich time and all of that, the time clocks and all were based upon London. So he was able to go back and look at the charts and the maps and charts of the sun and the moon and determine what day of the week it was 400 183 years after the decree of Artaxerxes Longimanus. And he found out that there were exactly 173,880 days from the decree of Artaxerxes Longimanus on Nisan 10, 445 BC, 483 years later, or 69 weeks of years later, to the day. Guess what happened on that day?
Triumph on the tree.
Palm Sunday.
That's exactly right. What we will call Palm Sunday, Sir Robert Anderson found out, occurred in 32 AD. Nisan 10 was a Sunday. And Jesus just happened to be riding into Jerusalem on a donkey for the final time on that day. That's why this passage is one of the most amazing passages in the Bible, because it proves beyond all doubt that the Bible is the Word of God and was written by a supernatural, all-seeing, all-powerful, transcendent, sentient being who can see outside of the space-time dimension, because he told some old Jewish guy 500 years before Jesus was even born to write down that on this specific day something was going to happen, and that something we're going to find out about very shortly. But let's just look at the math real quick, and we'll go back to the 70 weeks of Daniel math chart. Okay, again, so Robert Anderson thankfully did all the math, so I don't have to. But we find out that the commandment to rebuild and restore Jerusalem given by Artaxerxes Longimanus on what would be our month, March 14, 445 BC, on the Jewish calendar, Nisan 10, 445 BC. Okay, so now we find out that we have 69 weeks of years. Why? Because it says so in Daniel chapter 9, verse 25. That's where you get your 69 weeks of years, because it says right here, know therefore and understand that from the going forth of the commandment to restore and build Jerusalem, whose decree was that? Artaxerxes Longimanus, Nisan 10, 445 BC. So those of you out there in TV land, make a note next to Daniel chapter 9, verse 25. This is where the 69 weeks of years runs. And it says, from Artaxerxes' decree, Nisan 10, 445 BC, unto Messiah the Prince, or Moshiach Nagid, that is to say, the Messiah will come and present himself to Israel, shall be 7 weeks and 62 weeks, or, stated another way, 69 weeks of years, or, stated another way, 483 years, or, stated another way, 173,880 days to the day. Guess what happens? Something happens to fulfill that purpose. So we know that the Bible is now, Daniel has already written it, because he's going to be long dead. When this is, so he's writing this down, like write down the book and seal it up. We'll find that out in Daniel chapter 12. Write down the prophecies I told you about, including the stuff Gabriel told you, and seal it up until the time of the end. Yeah, but I didn't understand all the 69 weeks of years, and Mashiach Nagid, and he's going to be cut off. Could you explain that part to me again? Because I didn't get it. They're like, no, go your way, Daniel, and seal up the book until the time of the end. So we now know that in verse 25, there's a mathematical date. So we now know that Daniel is saying, well, God told me to tell you that 173,880 days after Artaxerxes Longimanus gives this decree, which he's about to give on Nisan 10, 445 BC, 173,880 days later, something very spectacular is going to happen. And if it doesn't, then the Bible is nonsense. And, it's not to be believed. It's not to be respected. And we find out that special something was, as Phil said, Palm Sunday, when Jesus presented himself. Right. And he presented himself as the Messiah, but not Messiah the King. He presented himself actually as Messiah, the blood sacrifice. So Messiah the Prince would come and present himself to the nation of Israel to be a blood sacrifice to atone for the nation of Israel and for the sins of the sons of Adam. And he would do that at the temple, and that's really interesting because most of the people that read the Bible and criticize it, they can't refute the fact that the guys that write the Bible set up stories that don't end with a happy ending with the spoils to the victor. The guy gets the girl, and they live happily ever after. Daniel's writing, Messiah is going to show up 173,880 days later. But we're going to find out when we get to Daniel chapter 9, verse 26, that something terrible is going to happen. And just to give you a preview of that, it says after 62 weeks, the Messiah will be cut off or killed. And that we get from Daniel chapter 9. And let's we won't read that yet, but let's go and look at Luke chapter 19, verse 35. Who's up next? Phil? Luke chapter 19, verse 35. Read that for us.
And they brought him to Jesus. And they cast their garments upon the colt, and they set Jesus thereon.
And verse 36, 37. Read 36 through 40.
And as he went, they spread their clothes in the way. And when he was come nigh, even now at the descent of the Mount of Olives, the whole multitude of the disciples began to rejoice and praise God with a loud voice for all the mighty works that they had seen, saying, Blessed be the King that cometh in the name of the Lord, peace in heaven and glory in the highest.
Okay, let's stop right there. Okay, so what we find out is, I fast forward us to the Gospel of Luke, chapter 19, because this is hitting the fast forward button from Daniel chapter 9, verse 25. I fast forwarded to exactly 173,880 days later, and this is where it landed. It landed in Luke chapter 19, verse 35 in the New Testament in the Gospels, and we find out that Jesus is riding on a donkey into the city of Jerusalem. Near the Mount of Olives, the people threw their clothes in the road and said to him, Blessed be the King who comes in the name of the Lord, peace in heaven, glory in the highest. Wow. The people are hailing Jesus as Messiah, the Prince, the King, And how did the Pharisees react, Stephen? Verses 39 through 44.
And some of the Pharisees from among the multitude said unto him, Master, rebuke thy disciples. And he answered and said unto them, I tell you that if these should hold their peace, the stones would immediately cry out.
Stop right there. Now, interestingly enough, throughout Jesus' 3-year earthly ministry, he would perform these miracles and do stuff like healing lepers, raising people, and then he'd go, see that you say nothing about it, but just go show yourselves to the priest. And then they run in, hey, this guy Jesus healed me, and blah, blah, blah. And then Jesus would go fleeing for cover in Galilee and hiding out, in the mountains or whatever, because then the people wanted to take him and force him to become king, And so he would do these magical, wonderful, supernatural acts of God, proving that he was, in fact, the Messiah. But then he would tell people, don't tell anybody. When Jesus performed his first miracle, who can tell me? Who remembers what the first miracle was, Ingrid?
Wine.
Yep. The first miracle was wine. What did he do?
Turned water into wine.
Yep. At whose behest? Who asked him to do that?
Mary.
Now, which Mary was it? Mary at Mary's Vineyards or whatever?
No,
Which
his
Mary
mother.
would it be? His mother. The one that the Catholic Church reveres as some kind of divine, supernatural, sin-free person. No, she told Jesus, turn this water into wine, son. Why? Because it was going to save the life of some dying child who was suffering from a lack of wine tasting? No. It was because she was what?
Because they drank all the wine at the party.
Her girlfriend was having like a, bachelorette party. And, they didn't have Chippendale boys back then, but they did have wine.
The wine was thrown.
So, they ran out of wine. And so she was like, what do you see what my kid can do? Jesus, come here, boy. Turn this water into wine. And what did Jesus say? Oh, Mother of God, Queen of Heaven, thy command is my very wish. I bow down before you, sin-free Mother of God. He gave her, in a gentle, respectful way, a slap in the mouth in front of all her friends and said to her, Woman, what have I to do with thee? My time has not yet come. When I read that as a kid, I was like, well, see, Mommy, you said come back with Jesus. See what he said to his mom? Well, you're not Jesus. Smack. And so, I let that one go. I took that argument out of my repertoire of things to do to convince my mom to let me do stuff. So, she was right. It wasn't Jesus, so I got smacked in the face. But anyway, Jesus was like, you'd almost say, it was almost borderline disrespectful. Because Jesus, he's still a young guy, he's like, woman. And he refers to, I can't remember any verses where Jesus referred to Mary as his mom. Hey, Mom, love you, Mom. Every time Jesus made reference to her, he called her woman. Then he says to John, behold thy mother. Woman, behold thy son. In other words, John's my right-hand man. I'm dead. I can't be a son to you. I can't help you grow old and take care of you and drive you to the supermarket when your eyes begin to fail you. John's going to do all that stuff for me because he's my buddy. But even when he's addressing her from the cross, he refers to her by the title woman. Because he's letting us know, I'm God, and she is my creation. I'm the creator, and she is the creature that I created. And the Catholic Church has twisted that through satanic subterfuge. But if we go to the Word of God, there is no question as to the doctrine of the Queen of Heaven being applicable to Mary, the mother of the body of Jesus, is absolutely unbiblical. So at the wedding feast at Cana in Galilee, Jesus says, woman, what have I to do with thee? My time has not yet come. And Mary backing down, she's still, that's how you know she's still flesh. She's not a bad person. She's just a fallen person like the rest of us. And so instead of her saying like, Jesus, I should be ashamed of myself trying to exploit and pimp out the power of God Almighty to hook my girlfriend up with an extra cask of wine. It's like going to Jesus. Yo, we're out the kegger, man. We're out. We don't have enough money to go get another keg, Jesus. Pull the magic trick. This is a 4-kegger, Jesus. We only got 3. Hook us up. Can you imagine saying that to the God who created you and caused your heart to beat? So Jesus rebukes his mother. And mom, being a mom, she knows. She says to the servants instead, I repent in sackcloth and ashes for this wicked, fleshly attempt to exploit the miracle working power of God for my own personal benefit. Like Benny Hinn and TBN and those guys. Oops, did I say that? Goodness forbid. Yeah, that's what you see on, TV evangelism or televangelism. You see that. But instead of her repenting of that, what does she say? She says to the servant, whatever he says, you need to do it, And she kind of did it. And Jesus, being a kind-hearted person and compassionate, he's already made the point. He took the water and turned it into wine. It was the best wine they ever had. But he was sending a message, not to be mean, but letting her know, I'm God, and you are my creation. Let's not forget our positions, shall we? And he was sending a message to us, too. The whole idea of Mary being the Queen of Heaven, being sin-free, the Immaculate Conception, according to Catholic Church, is not Jesus, it's Mary. We know that that's not the case because of this. Okay, but I digress. The whole point of me going into that is Jesus said to Mary, my time has not yet come. What did he mean by that?
To be praised as he was praised this on Sunday.
He wasn't ready. Yeah, he wasn't ready to be grasped and declared to be the Mashiach Nagid, or the Messiah, the Prince, the King of Israel, because that's what these people were saying. They were blessed be the King who comes in the name of the Lord. But after 3 years of denying that position or downplaying it and trying to run away from it, it would seem, as Chuck Missler puts it, he not only participates in it, he arranges it by getting the donkey, which fulfills Old Testament prophecy about the Messiah riding humble and lowly. That's Zechariah? Exactly. There you go. All right. Zechariah, you got that? What's it say?
Wow.
Zechariah 9. Look at that girl, man. She is the Bible answer girl. Zechariah 9 and 9.
Rejoice greatly, O daughter of Zion, shout, O daughter of Jerusalem. Behold, thy king cometh unto thee. He is just and having salvation, lowly and riding upon an ass, upon the colt, the foal of an ass.
Which means a baby donkey, basically. Mm-hmm. And so what Jesus is doing is he's fulfilling the prophecy that was written about him 500 years earlier by the prophet Zechariah by riding into Jerusalem on a donkey. And he had to, because that was who he was, and the time was at hand. Why was the time at hand? Because it was exactly 173,880 days after Artaxerxes Longimanus gave the decree that was referred to in Daniel chapter 9, verse 25. Because on that day, something special was supposed to happen. And so Jesus says to Mary, my time has not yet come. But that was 3 years earlier. 3 years later, he says, when he's rebuked by the Pharisees, Rabbi, tell your servants to be quiet. This is an outrage. What's Jesus' response? Verse 4.
My time.
Steve, read that for us.
I tell you that if these should hold their peace, the stones immediately cry out.
These should hold a peace, the stones themselves would immediately cry out. So the question remains, why would that be? Well, we get the answer. Because what? Daniel chapter 9, verse 25. Because today was the day. Go ahead and finish this up, verses 41 through 44.
And when he was come near, he beheld the city and wept over it, saying, if thou hast known, even thou, at least in this thy day, the things which belong unto thy peace, but now they are hid from thine eyes. For the day shall come upon thee, that thine enemies shall cast a trench about thee, and compass thee round, and keep thee in on every side.
Now this next verse is critical and key. Read that for us.
And shall lay thee even with the ground, and thy children within thee. And they shall not leave in thee one stone upon another, because thou knewest not the time of thy visitation.
Uh-oh. So Jesus is saying, all throughout his earthly ministry, he avoided praise and adulation and being proclaimed king, because it was not yet time, which he explained as well, my time is not yet come. But now, it is Palm Sunday. This is the day, Nisan 1032 AD, that ritualistically speaking, to fulfill the Mosaic law written down in Leviticus, what has to happen? What special thing happens on Nisan 10 every year in the land of Israel? Passover is on...
Sorry. On the 14th.
Yes, so it relates to the Passover. What specifically happens?
Introduce the lamb.
Oh.
Nisan 10, we find out...
Special Passover, which is the Sabbath before the Sabbath, which in each week.
Say that again.
It's a special Sabbath.
Well, that's true, but that's not what Nisan 10 is all about.
Picking a lamb.
You're making a point that's a little bit further down the road, that it had to be 32 AD, and we know it was 32 AD because that was the year that there was a special Sabbath contiguous to the regular Saturday Sabbath. But no, Nisan 10 is not the Sabbath.
That's where you pick a lamb?
Nisan 10 is the day that's laid out for us in the book of Exodus, when Israel was about to leave Egypt. Then God says to Moses, tell the people to grab a little baby lamb on Nisan 10 and bring him into the house. And let the kids play with him for 4 days. And then on the 14th, slit his throat and kill it at night and eat him. And then God says, I want you to reenact this or commemorate this thing every year that you're in the land of Israel. Because on Nisan 10, the first time this ever happened was during not the Babylonian captivity, but during a captivity centuries before that. During the Egyptian captivity that was depicted by Cecil B. DeMille's movie, The Ten Commandments. When Moses goes to the people, he tells them, okay, in Nisan 10, you got to grab a little baby lamb. And you take them, you play with them for 4 days, and then on the 14th of Nisan, this is what the Lord said to do. Slit the little kid's throat, collect it in a bowl, and then take the bowl, take some hyssop branches, take the blood from the bowl, and paint it on the front of your door in the form of a cross. Bam, bam, bam. You know, and we're doing this because of what? My kid's flipping out. He loved it. You know, Bambi, Bambi the lamb, And it's because God said so. And I don't understand what it means, so don't ask it. I don't know. Just do it. But we know now,
Yes, it's foreshadowing.
it was a foreshadowing of the crucifixion of another Passover lamb who will be the once for all time blood sacrifice, not just some little baby lamb. But the reason why a baby lamb is picked is lambs are innocent and pure, and they're passive, and they don't fight, and they don't make noise, and when you kill them, they don't cry out. And a baby lamb is because it's gentle and meek, and the kids loved it. And so what God wanted to do was to show you what a painful sacrifice this is for me to give my only begotten son, who like a lamb is led to the slaughter without even fighting back. And we know that because we read about it in John chapters 17, 18, and 19, when Jesus is standing before Pontius Pilate and he says, "Don't you realize that I have the power to let you go or to have you crucified?" And Jesus calmly responds to him, "You have no power over me at all, were it not delivered to you from above. Therefore, the ones that brought me to you have greater sin than you do." And Pilate was, what the freak was that all about? He's like, "Oh, shoot, we got some philosopher here."
It's, I don't know, there's a dialogue about something.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, we're still up.
It's okay.
But so Jesus confounds Pontius Pilate, and he's like, is that right? Okay. And so Jesus is being presented as the Passover lamb, and he's there with Pontius Pilate, but he's not protesting his death. Pilate is pissed at Jesus, to put it bluntly, because he's like, "Look, I'm trying to get you off.
Yeah.
Don't you see I'm on your side, dude? I'm trying to give you a hookup, a solid for a holiday weekend. Go enjoy the Passover with your family and friends. Just stay out of trouble, And Jesus won't bite. He won't help Pilate, help him get off the hook. So Pilate's panicked now because his wife said, "I had a dream about this righteous man. I have nothing to do with him. Don't do anything to hurt him. I don't know. I had a dream, and I think there's something hinky going on."
Interesting, yeah.
And so Pilate is desperately trying to get Jesus off, and Jesus is absolutely playing dumb. He's like, "I got nothing to say." But all you got to do is say you're not the king of the Jews, and I'll let you go, or that you were joking, or you're not going to try to overthrow the government, and you're not a terrorist. And Jesus wouldn't say anything. He just wouldn't respond. He's like, "Say something. Don't you know I have all the power in the world to let you go?" And Jesus wouldn't, because this was the appointed time. This is why he came. And this is why I love this portion of the Bible, John chapter 19, when Jesus is taking the time to explain to this pagan governor exactly how everything works out. He says, "It's for this cause that I was born, and for this cause came I into the world, to testify to the truth." And Pilate says, "What is truth? Like, what truth? What in the world is truth?" And Jesus is explaining to him, I'm the kinsman redeemer. I'm not just here to save the people of Israel like the blood sacrifice did that night in the land of Israel. I'm here to save all the sons of Adam. You're a son of Adam, Pilate. I'm here to save you and your pagan Roman family. You don't understand it yet, but Cornelius the centurion, he understands it, So when you look back at what the crucifixion was depicted as back in Exodus, we find out that under the Exodus rules regarding Nisan 10, which was the day that you would bring the lamb and present it to the priest, and that's what the tradition became. You take the little baby lamb, take it over to the temple, present it to the priest, and the priest would observe it for 4 days, which kind of commemorates taking the original baby lamb into the houses in the land of Israel 4 days before the Passover first occurred when they escaped from out of Egypt. And the priest would observe it, make sure it doesn't have hoof and mouth disease and drops over dead or whatever. And then when you see it's pure, then on the 14th, it can be sacrificed as the blood sacrifice. So what we find out is back in the book of Exodus, and this is really interesting because you have to fine line read this to pick this up. What it says in Exodus, and if anybody, since we're talking about, let somebody go get it. I didn't throw it in the outline, but there's so much richness in the Bible, and it just builds upon us. If we get this stuff down foundationally, everything builds upon itself, and it just reinforces itself, and it shows you how awesome the Bible is. But in essence, what it says is that
To take the lamb.
Take the lamb, put the blood on the bowl. We'll go ahead and read it, Ingrid, and then we'll talk about it.
I think it's
Exodus chapter.
12:3.
I don't have it in front of me.
Okay,
But
speaking unto the congregation of Israel, saying, In the 10th day of this month they shall take to them every man a lamb, according to the house of their fathers, a lamb for a house.
Mm-hmm.
And if the household be too little for the lamb, let him and his neighbor next unto his house take it according to the number of souls. Every man according to his eating shall make your count for the lamb. Your lamb shall be without blemish, a male of the first year. Ye shall take it out from the sheep or the goats, and ye shall keep it up until the 14th day of the same month.
Excellent, excellent. Okay, drop down and read verse 11.
And thus shall ye eat it with your loins girded, and your shoes on your feet, and your staff in your hand, and ye shall eat it in haste. It is the Lord's Passover.
Keep going.
For I will pass through the land of Egypt this night, and will smite all of the firstborn in the land of Egypt, both man and beast, and against all the gods of Egypt I will execute judgment. I am the Lord. And the blood shall be to you for a token upon the houses where ye are. And when I see the blood, I will pass over you, and the plague shall not be upon you to destroy you when I smite the land of Egypt.
So that's where we get the whole phrase Passover. And it's interesting because we find out that the Lord says, take the lamb and put the blood on the doors. And why don't you go ahead, Ingrid, and just go ahead and read verse 23 for us at no additional cost. Throw it in there.
For the Lord will pass through to smite the Egyptians, and when he seeth the blood upon the lintel and on the two side posts, the Lord will pass over the door, and will not suffer the destroyer to come into unto your houses to smite you.
The interesting thing here is that what this is saying, and I looked at it very closely, it's saying that whoever has the blood of the lamb in the form of the cross on their door, the destroyer will pass over their home. Didn't say all the Jewish people that have the blood on the door, I will pass over you when I come to the land. And he took pains to say, it doesn't matter whether you're Jewish or not. If you are Jewish and you don't have the blood of the lamb in the form of a cross outside your house, the destroyer's going to come and kill everybody. I'm going to kill the animals. I'm going to kill all the Egyptians that don't have the blood. And the Egyptians, because they didn't believe and they didn't participate, the firstborn of the Egyptians were put to death. But if they had put the blood of the lamb on the door, they would have been protected. Or if they had come into the house of one of the Jewish people that had the blood on the door, the destroyer would have passed over that house and not killed the firstborn or the animals in that house. So what that's saying is God is no respecter of persons. He doesn't like the Jews more than the Gentiles, and the Gentiles get kicked in the groin by God. No. He says, all of you are sons of Adam, and I love all of you. And that's why the kinsman redeemer, we find out in the book of Ruth, is both a Jew and a Gentile. That's why Ruth the Moabitess is in the bloodline of Jesus of Nazareth, because she's a Gentile, which means that Jesus can be the kinsman redeemer not just for the Jewish people, but for the Gentile people too, because he has to be the blood sacrifice for both. If there had been no Gentiles in the bloodline of the Messiah through Ruth, then only Jews could be saved by believing on Jesus, and Gentiles would all be condemned to hell. And that's sad, because there are a lot more Gentiles in the world than Jews. But we also find out that you have to actively take upon yourself the belief and the practice, and you have to cover your house with the blood. And so we see that practice begun in Exodus chapter 12. And we see that that's what's being played out now in 32 AD, Nisan 10. That whole Passover passion play, if you will, that originates in Exodus chapter 12 that Ingrid just read to us, has been replicated every year since Israel left Egypt. That night after they ate the Passover, they left with haste. And God led them opened the Red Sea, and led them into the promised land of milk and honey, and established for them again the kingdom of Israel. And so we find out that Jesus, on this specific special day, Palm Sunday 32 AD, is now arranging for himself to be glorified as the King of Israel. And he says, if the people remain silent, the very rocks will cry out. And the reason for that is because today was the day. And what day is that again, Steve?
Psalm 10, 32, 18, or 173,888 day,
880.
80th day from the decree of Artaxerxes Longimanus to rebuild the wall.
And if somebody challenges you on that, where do you find that in the Bible? That 69 weeks of years.
Daniel chapter 9.
Daniel chapter 9, what verse?
25.
Verse 25. Verse 25 gives us the 69 weeks of years, or the 173,000 days, or 173,880 days. And in that day, we find out through all the mathematical computation, the charts that Sir Robert Anderson checked, he found out, much to his shock, oh my gosh, it was Palm Sunday 32 AD. The Bible is the Word of God. It is the most amazing prophecy in all of the Bible. And that's why Jesus didn't silence his disciples, because he was like, I don't want the rocks talking, so somebody's got to declare me to be the King of Israel, because that's who I am. And it's not because he had some ego-driven agenda. It was because he was fulfilling the prophecy of Zechariah chapter 9, and God doesn't do anything before he warns people, and then when the fulfillment happens, he lets them know, behold, the Lord is against you, I'm about to smack you in your face. Go ahead, Steve.
So, do you think, do any of those folks that are crying out, do they have an idea? Do they understand the prophecy maybe? Or they just led by the Spirit there in terms of...
No, they don't understand the prophecy, because I know they don't understand the prophecy, and it says that
He says so. Jesus
Don't you
says
know?
so
You should have
because
known.
you should have known if you knew the book.
where is that? Where is that? That's in Luke chapter 8. Luke chapter 18. Excuse me, Luke chapter 19, verse.
35.
Well, I would say verse 44. He's saying, you know, Jesus, after he says, I'm not going to rebuke my disciples, he says, verse 42 of Luke chapter 19, he looks at the city of Jerusalem in verse 41, right after he's triumphantly entered and been declared the King of the Jews. And then verse 42, he says to the nation of Israel and to the people gathered at Jerusalem, if thou hadst known, even thou, at least in this thy day, what day? 170,808th day after the great Artaxerxes, or 69th week of the year, the things which belong unto thy peace. But now these things are hidden from thine eyes. And then he goes on verse 43 to predict that all these bad things are going to happen. And he says, the day shall come upon thee that your enemies are going to cast a trench about thee, come to thee around, keep thee in on every side, and shall lay thee even with the ground, and thy children within thee. Oh my gosh, he's saying that somebody's going to come and raze the city of Jerusalem to the ground and kill all the kids in the city, and they shall not leave one stone upon another. And we find that true of the temple. Because what? Because you kicked off God? No. Because thou knewest not the time of thy visitation. What time? Today is the day. This was the 173,880th day after the decree of Artaxerxes Longimanus. This was the 69th, or the 69 weeks of years reaching their fulfillment. And Jesus is saying, you were supposed to know. You were ordered by God to study the scriptures. The same way Daniel was studying the book of Jeremiah at the end of the Babylonian captivity, you should have been studying the book of Zechariah. You should have been studying Daniel chapter. After Daniel got inspired by Jeremiah's prophetic writings, he wrote down his prophetic writings in the book of Daniel, which you had available to you prior to my birth, and you didn't know. And because you didn't know, all these terrible things are going to happen to Jerusalem. And it did happen eventually, about 30 years later, in 70 AD, the Romans came. Steve.
Is he addressing the people who were crying out, blessed be the name of the King, or is he addressing the Pharisees there? Because in 39, he says some of the Pharisees said to them, and then that's when he says, and he answered them. I guess the question I was asking is those who were singing out to him. When he comes into Jerusalem, those who were singing out, blessed be the King that cometh in the name of the Lord. Do do they know? Do they have an idea? Or
And
they
again,
led by the Spirit? Or
No, I think it's very clear that they didn't understand that this was a fulfillment of the prophetic message of Daniel, because if they had, they would have understood that the very next verse, which we haven't gotten to yet, says that the Messiah gets killed right after he gets presented. So what they were doing was saying, he's performed all these miracles.
okay.
This is the high holy. Remember, this is like Christmas Eve.
Sure.
You know, for us, Christmas in the United States of America is the big holiday or whatever. It's the big religious time of the year. It's like Easter used to be when we were kids. You put your Sunday best on, you go to church, you go to sunrise service and all. It would be like some super holy, righteous, religious dude walked right into your town, and you were fired up. You were ready now. You know how people get really passionate about religion, especially on religious high holy holidays, whether it be Passover for the Jews, Easter for the Catholics, Resurrection Sunday for the evangelical Christians, Ramadan for the Muslims. People want to fast and they want to pray. They want to do all kinds of religious stuff because they're hyped into a fit of religious expression. And so I think what the people are doing here are unknowingly fulfilling the prophecy of the Psalms that says,
Yes.
and
118.
Ingrid, bang that out for us, man. Could you find that? Is it Psalm 118
Yeah.
that says that the Messiah?
Blessed, it's 118:26. Blessed he that come in the name of the Lord. We have blessed you out of the house of the Lord.
And so that is a direct quote from the book of Psalms. And that's what the people were reading.
The
They were like,
disciples,
holy-
disciples were.
Well, the disciples weren't. No, it wasn't the disciples.
Just the crowd.
It was the crowd.
It began, the whole multitude of the disciples began to rejoice and praise God with a loud voice.
Well, let's take a look and see. Let's go back to Luke chapter 19. Oh, this come on. That was
37.
the love of the seen, saying, whole multitude of the disciples. Okay, the disciples are joining in as well. Disciples are joining in, but the people are saying, yes, and you're right. The disciples, right here, it's clear. It says, it's clear as day. The disciples are saying, blessed be the King who comes in the name of. But the people are saying it as well. And if you look at some of the other synoptic gospels, you'll see that it wasn't just the 12 guys. Remember, Judas is already, or he very shortly will run off. But it's not just his 12 disciples. It's the people that are also, and if you look at some of the, go to Matthew, I think you'll see the same depiction. You'll see that the people were saying it. But the people were saying it not because they had studied Daniel 9. So, this is the 69 weekly. Oh, okay, we got to declare them. Oh, what the people were doing was reacting now on the high holy holiday of Passover. They want to cast off the yoke of Roman oppression. They were looking for a Messiah. People in Israel are still looking for a Messiah. And that's why Antichrist is going to do so well when he arrives. Because people inherently know the system we have run by men, the governmental system, which presidential candidate are you supporting? Like, it's darned if you do, darned if you don't. Pick your poison. Do you want to take strychnine or an overdose of, phenobarbital? You're going to die either way. And so the people back then in 32 AD were saying, man, we've got a guy who we've been trying to get to declare himself to be the Messiah for the longest time. Now, some of them may have noticed that he was riding on a donkey. Maybe a couple, hey, I remember my mom said Messiah would come riding in on a donkey. And Jesus specifically arranged that he be on a baby donkey when he rides into town. Now, some of the people in the crowd might have known that. But Jesus, again, when the Pharisees are saying, rebuke your disciples, the disciples are stirring the crowd up. But the people were also hailing him as the Messiah. Not just the disciples, but they did it, probably the disciples under the inspiration of the Holy Spirit, and the people may have done it under the inspiration of the Holy Spirit as well. I'm sure they did. But I don't think it was because they sat down that morning and read Daniel 9. Oh, wait, today let's wait and see if somebody shows up riding on a donkey. Because if it does, that's the guy. No, because Jesus says right there in verse 42 and 43 and 44, you didn't know that this was the day. And so, after that, man, what do you have? You have disaster coming. I mean, that happens in 70 AD. So, okay, so we kind of segued away, and obviously, man, there's such richness here. We'll finish up the 69 weeks of years tonight, and we'll start the 17th week next week. But let's go ahead, and I think we rotated around to Steve. Are we around a year? Okay, so we know that Jesus just rode into Jerusalem on a donkey, and we know it was, as Phil told us, Palm Sunday, 32 AD, and Phil also pointed out another point. I was going to bring my chart, but I said, I got so many things to talk about, I don't know if I want to bring the chart. But I did a chart by hand to show the years in which there was a contiguous special Sabbath and a regular Sabbath. In other words, just like Christmas falls a different day of the week every year. If it's on Wednesday this year, it'll be on Thursday next year, it'll be on Friday year after that, Saturday. You always liked it when it was like on a Thursday, because you got Christmas Eve was Wednesday, Christmas Day was Thursday, and so Friday everything was going to be closed anyway, whether you have work or whatever. That, there's no point coming in on Friday. Friday's the day after Christmas, so you get that sort of, and then you get your Saturday, Sunday. Man, it's the best. When Christmas falls on Thursday, buddy, that is the best, because you got your Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, bro. It's like a 5-day weekend. Yeah, baby. And so that's the way it was with the special Sabbath. In 32 AD, 25 AD, and 39 AD, the Sabbath, which is every Saturday, was abutted by the special Sabbath of the Feast of Unleavened Bread, which rotated each day of the week. One day it's on Monday, next day it's on Tuesday, next day it's on Wednesday. Just like Christmas rotates all the way through the 7 days of the week, and it starts all over again. So every 7th year, it would have been on the Friday preceding the regular Saturday Sabbath. And for the prophecies relating and the description in the book of John about, it was the preparation for the Passover, and Jesus spent 3 days and 3 nights in the heart of the earth, then he had to be taken down from the cross because, the Passover was about to begin, it says in the book of John. But if the Passover that was about to begin was the regular Saturday Sabbath, then, the Sabbath was about to begin, is what the scripture says. Jesus had to be taken down for the cross because the Sabbath was about to begin. Most people interpret that, and the Catholic Church promoted that means that the Saturday Sabbath was about to begin, which means Jesus was crucified on a Friday, which they call, for some odd reason, Good Friday, which is preceded by Maundy Thursday or whatever. But no. Jesus had to be crucified before that, because he couldn't, as he said, as the prophet Jonas, spent 3 days and a day and a half. No, 3 days and a night and a half? No, 3 days and 3 nights in the belly of the whale. So must the Son of Man spend 3 days and a night and a half in the hotel room. No, 2 nights in the hotel room. Get 2 days and 1 night free if you use your bonus point. No, 3 days and 3 nights. You can't get 3 days and 3 nights in the grave from a Friday crucifixion to a pre-sunrise resurrection. Jesus didn't rise with the sun. That's the Sol Invictus, worship of Horus, Osiris, the rising sun, Eastern mysticism, sun worship. Is when, you see the guys out on the beach, when I'm running on the beach, worshiping the sun as it rises. And that's why, the sunrise Easter services are basically paganized counterfeits of what the pagan world's been doing and worshiping the sun for centuries. No, Jesus was already resurrected before the sun came up. So you couldn't have gotten 3 days and 3 nights into a Friday crucifixion, which was followed by a pre-sunrise resurrection. There's no way you get 3 days and 3 nights in it. So it had to have been the Thursday crucifixion. And we find out, just like Sir Robert Anderson told us, that there was on 25 AD, 32 AD, and 39 AD, contiguous special Sabbath, regular Sabbath. And so the Passover, Feast of Unleavened Bread, is also a Sabbath. It's a special Sabbath. And that's the Sabbath that is being referred to in the book of John. So no, the Bible isn't wrong. There aren't mistakes. And this is with mathematical precision that even a mathematical moron like myself can understand. and explain to other people. This proves that the Bible is the Word of God, and it's supernatural, and it's exciting. And I could talk about Daniel 9 forever, but Phil's gonna throw me out before too long. So what I'm gonna do is we're gonna run right on over and get to the last of the verses that relate to the 69 weeks of years, and that's Daniel.
I like Daniel chapter 9.
Oh, you like it too?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's exciting, right?
Amazing.
It's when Dave Hunt I first heard him lecture on it. Like he has a mathematics degree as well, and he was talking about it like he was talking about differential equations. Man, he was like laying stuff down and bang, and I was like, dude, this guy isn't even talking to me like a Bible preacher talking to me about a matter of faith. He's talking to me like the certified public accountant that he was, and he's laying stuff down with mathematical precision like I'm sitting in a college class. Like, you'd have to be a moron not to understand this is supernatural. Do you now understand why you have to know this was written not by Daniel but by God? How could he have known 500 years later Jesus would arrive in town at exactly this time and date? Well, Jesus, they talk about, well, Jesus read the prophecies and arranged for stuff that, and then you can refute that by saying, yeah, did he arrange for the Roman soldiers to beat him and tear his beard off and spit in his face? Right? And did he arrange for,
The Pharisees said, let's take him after the festival.
Right.
Let's take him after the...
Right.
Remember his garment to gamble his garments.
That's a great, he would have had, first off, he didn't have any money,
Right.
so he wouldn't have been able to bribe the Roman soldiers with anything anyway. But he would have had to have bribed the Roman soldiers into, look, after, you strip me naked and gamble for my clothes, because that's, well, why am I doing it? Well, this old Jewish prophecy, and what's going to happen is, I'm going to take a drug and pretend like I'm dead, but I'm not really going to be dead. So when you nail me, make sure you miss the vena cava superior ulnar nerve, because if you hit that, I'll bleed to death, and we don't want that. So we're going to pretend that I'm dead, and then when I come back from the dead, which I never really died from, because you're going to help me with all this stuff, they're going to think I'm the king of the Jews, and I'll be the new king that they worship. And the Roman centurions are going to agree to do that because what? Because they're going to get their heads cut off if they help a new king rise up. So you're right. For a million reasons, you can't falsify the claims of Jesus and the actions of Jesus. And that's why it's so awesome that Daniel's writing this 500 years before Jesus is born. He can't try to help Jesus fulfill the prophecy because he has no idea who Jesus is. But he's told this by Gabriel, and this is where we'll leave it. Daniel chapter 9, verse 26, Steve.
And after 62 weeks shall Messiah be cut off, but not for himself. And the people of the prince that shall come shall destroy the city and the sanctuary. And the end thereof shall be with a flood. And unto the end of the war desolations are determined.
Okay, so the first half of that, verse 26, Daniel chapter 9, very key. And after 62 weeks. Now, what's another way of saying after the 62 weeks?
62 weeks.
Ah.
69. It's 63.
Yeah, exactly. This is the verse that tripped me up when I was studying the 69 weeks of Daniel. I remember it was like sometime, what was it? Right after the World Trade Center. I remember I got asked to speak on this topic on a radio show in Michigan. And I was sitting in the law library at the University of Michigan, man. I remember I was in the underground law library. It's like 5 stories down, back home in Ann Arbor. And I remember I had my little prophecy. I had this big chart in a book. And I was sitting there going through my notes one last time because I knew I was going to be going on the air. This was going to be broadcast in the metropolitan Detroit area, which is a couple of counties over from Ann Arbor. So I'm sitting in the basement of the law library at the University of Michigan. And I'm studying it up, and I get to this verse, and I'm like, after 62 weeks, Messiah will be cut off and himself. And then people, and I was like, 62. And I was like, wait, now, that doesn't, wait, hold on now. I was like, wait, there's 70, and then there's the 70 years, which was the captivity period, and then there were 70 weeks of years, and the 70 weeks of years was divided into 69 weeks of years and the 70th. I had that down. I was like, where's the 62 come in at? And that stumped me for life. Oh my gosh, the Bible's wrong. I went back and listened to Dave Hunt's lectures and, like 2 or 3, and then I finally figured it out. That when you see the prophecy relating to the 69 weeks of years that's laid out in verse 25, it's laid out like an algebraic equation. Know therefore and understand, Daniel chapter 9, verse 25, that from the going forth of the commandment to restore and build Jerusalem until Messiah the Prince, Mashiach Negi, shall be 7 weeks and 62 weeks. So what we find in verse 26 is Daniel is using mathematical shorthand, and he's only quoting the final variable of the equation that he's assuming you already know. He's saying, and after the 62 weeks that are preceded by the 7 weeks and 62 weeks, in other words, he's saying after the 69 weeks of the year, Messiah will be what? Karat. Karat in Hebrew means cut off. And cut off doesn't mean he was driving on I-95 and one of the typical Miami drivers were driving alongside and decided to cut him off. No. It means to be killed. To be put to death. And it says, importantly, Daniel's writing down what Gabriel's telling him to write. And he can't be trying to write the happy, victorious story because the Messiah is supposed to be the hero. He's the guy that all the Jewish kids looked up to all their lives. But he's being told, okay, now, right at the verse after he arrives and is hailed as the King of the Jews, write down that then he gets killed right after that. He's like, what? And then, but importantly, make sure you put in, he gets killed, not for anything he did. So, this is, Daniel's writing stuff down, he doesn't understand it. Why are you killing me? It's sad. He didn't even do anything. Why? Because he had to be the sin-free, blemish-free Passover lamb from Exodus chapter 12. If he had been killed for his own sins, he couldn't be my Passover sacrifice because he would not have passed the Levitical Exodean test of being a blemishless lamb, right? Because he would have been dying for his child pornography charge. Okay, you're dying for that. Treason, sedition against the Roman state. You tried to overthrow the Roman Empire. Oh, you're going to die for that. Okay, you can't die for me if you committed your own sins. So, we find out in Daniel chapter 9, verse 26, after the 69 weeks of years, Messiah does what? Presents himself as the Messiah and immediately gets put to death for something that he didn't do. He gets put to death for something everybody else did. And then, in the second half of Daniel chapter 9, verse 26, the B section of that verse, we get this strange, shadowy, dark, and the people of the prince that shall come, which is different than the prince that we were talking about one verse earlier.
Yes.
Messiah the prince is not the prince that shall come. No. It says, the people of the prince that shall come shall destroy the city and the sanctuary. When was the city of Jerusalem and the sanctuary destroyed the second time?
Titus 70 A.D.
Titus Vespasian, general of the of the Roman Empire, who later would become the emperor, rode into town, and now some people say it was an accident. Some people say that they were trying to get at the rebellious high priest, and somebody threw a torch in and caught the temple on fire. And the temple was, basically made of cedars of Lebanon. There was like these incredible, beautiful, polished wood walls that were plated in gold sheet, 18-karat gold sheet. Metal was lining this precious wood structure that was built on a foundation of stones. And so when it caught on fire, the wood burned, but it burnt with such intensity that it melted the metal or the gold. If it had been brass or iron, maybe it wouldn't have melted. But because gold burns, it's so pure and it's so soft, it burns at a much lower temperature than, say, something like titanium would. And so the fire from the wood, that's what the walls of the temple was made of, wasn't a concrete structure. It burned and melted the gold sheeting. And the gold sheeting turned like wax into rivulets of gold and ran down from the burning structure of the uprights, the wooden uprights, and went down to the floor, which was made out of foundation stones. And just like any liquid, finds its lowest level. It went through the cracks and went down, 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 several layers of stone down into the temple, so that after the fire was put out, there's millions of dollars of gold in the Nadar Hills. And so they had to take the temple apart, stone by stone, to get to millions of dollars worth of gold laying just below the surface. So that prophecy, God made the gold melt, and he made it go into the cracks, and he made somebody notice, hey, where'd the gold walls go? Gold doesn't just evaporate. It's when something, it melted. It's down there. Wait, is that a flip? Let me borrow your flashlight, Steve. And you're like, oh shoot, what's that? It's down there in the cracks. Let's wait till after that. Take the whole thing apart. Steve will be rich. They took the whole doggone Temple Mount platform thing apart, stone by stone, to get to the. Why else would you do it? To be mean to the Jews? No, you already destroyed the temple. They're not taking the stone apart, stone by stone, to be mean. And they're not doing it because they want to help fulfill prophecy, because they don't care about Jewish prophecy. They're doing it because they got a financial incentive. The incentive was to get to the gold that God made melt and go down into the cracks, so that those fools would be required to take the temple apart stone by stone, just like it says in the Bible. So, we find out that it says, the people of the prince that shall come shall destroy the city. And that's a hint that this prince that shall come, who is also known as the Antichrist. The little horn, Daniel calls him. He's called a lot of things. The Prince of Darkness, the Antichrist, the willful king, the worthless shepherd. Woe unto the worthless shepherd that leaveth the flock. But he comes, and we find a little bit of a hint as to what his, if not ethnic, certainly his national geopolitical affiliation will be, because it says, the people of the prince that shall come shall destroy the temple. So who were the people that destroyed the temple? The Romans, or at least members of the Roman Empire. Now, some of the people that were part of the Roman Empire in the Roman military came from other countries who weren't necessarily natural born. They weren't all born on the west side of Rome, or on the Via Appia, but they were part of the Roman Empire. So we know that the Antichrist probably is going to come from out of the Roman Empire. Won't necessarily mean he's born on the Via Appia, outside the city of Rome, within sight of the Colosseum, but he will probably, almost certainly, be affiliated with a revived Roman Empire. European Union, Antichrist, I don't know whether he's going to be Prince William or somebody from Great Britain or somebody from Italy or whatever, but we do know that we're given a hint here that the people, the Romans and the Roman Empire, destroyed the temple, and the Antichrist is going to be a prince of those people, meaning he's going to be a ruler of those people. So we got a hint right there as to who the Antichrist might be, and we already see the Roman Empire reforming in the form of the European Union right now on TV every night. We see it happening. And so, with that, we're going to break off, because that's a good segue point, because verses 24, 5, and 6 lay out for us phase 1 of the 70 weeks of Daniel, which we learned about when Phil read to us in Daniel chapter 9, verse 24, when Gabriel said 70 weeks of years are determined for your people, but not 70 contiguous weeks of years, or 490 consecutive years from 445 BC. No, that 70 weeks of years, or 490 years, is divided out into the first 69 weeks of years, or the first 483 years, at the conclusion of which, what happens?
The 70th.
At the conclusion of the 69 weeks of years,
Correct.
what happens? Messiah, first off, presents himself as the Messiah, the King of Israel, and then he's killed. Right? And then sometime after that, the people of the prince shall come, will destroy the temple, and that happened in 70 AD. And then we have an interesting implied gap between the first 69 weeks of years and the final 70th week of years, which precedes the return of Jesus. The return of Jesus isn't at the 70th week, it's at the conclusion of the 70th week. But the first 69 weeks of years, or 483 years, and the 70th week of years, the last 7 years before Jesus comes back, is separated by what I call the interregnum period. It is an implied parenthesis. And what fills that parenthesis between the first 69 weeks of years and the 70th week of
Church
years? The church age, which we see depicted sort of right here on our time chart. And that's where we go to the big board. We look at our Daniel 70th week. We got the first 69 weeks of years, 483 years. It's running contiguously, meaning one after another, after another, after another. From 445 BC to 32 AD, Nisan 10, Jesus appears, presents himself as the king of Israel, and is put to death on the cross on the Passover 4 days later. Then you have a parenthetical gap between verses 26 and verses 27 in Daniel chapter 9 that has lasted for 2,000 years. And at the conclusion of that, that church age, that parenthetical gap will end, I believe, at a big event called the what?
Return of Jesus.
Rapture.
No, Steve, the return of Jesus?
Second coming.
No, Steve, are you kidding me?
Say the question again.
The 69 weeks of years will be ended, and the church age, the parenthetical, will be ended by, you say come with Jesus, yeah, but the rapture has to come first, right? Because if Jesus comes back at the end of the church age, we missed out on the 70th week. The 70th week has to come, Steve, because there's some reckoning that has to be done. There's going to be a comeuppance. Satan is going to get his comeuppance during the 70th week, and the rebellious people of earth who have refused to bow the knee to Jesus willingly during his humble, lamb-like first 3-year earthly ministry are now going to be forced to face the wrath of God during the 7-year period of time, the 70th week of Daniel, and are also going to face the scourge of the Antichrist, and they're going to be forced to make a decision. Accept the mark of the beast and live in relative peace with the Antichrist and face the wrath of God, or refuse to take the mark of the beast, identify themselves with Jesus, and have their heads taken off. That's going to be a horrible period of time. That last 7-year period of time before Jesus comes back, the 70th week of Daniel, the rise and reign of the Antichrist on earth in a physical body will actually occur during that final, terrible 70th week of Daniel, which we will pick up in Daniel chapter 9, verse 27, starting next week if the rapture doesn't happen first. So, with that, any questions or comments about what we've looked at so far? Okay, so why don't we go ahead and let Phil go ahead and close us out in prayer, and then we'll pick up at verse 27 of Daniel chapter 9, the 70th week of Daniel, next week.
Oh Lord, thank you for the presence that we were able to feel tonight between us, because you inspired Lord Earth, you inspiring us in our response to be able to understand and to explain it all around us for the people to know that you are our King. You are the one that we are following. In Jesus' name we pray and worship you.
All right,
So interesting enough, you talked about the European Union.
Yeah.
I don't know